Wide aerial shot, Silk Road at sunrise. Endless desert dunes, winding caravan routes. Silkbanas flutter. Camel caravans move slowly. Buddhist monks walk with traders. Close-ups, prayer beads, Sanskrit scrolls. Ancient Silk Road cities, Dunhuang, Samarkand. Bustling markets, cultural exchange. Monks teaching under temple roofs. Cave temples, murals, Buddha statues. Camera pans across serene faces. Sunset shot, monk with scroll, caravans forward.
Buddhism started in India, but most Buddhists today aren't Indian. So how did a religion from one country end up looking completely different in China, Japan, Tibet, and Thailand? The answer is one of the most incredible stories in human history, and it all happened because of trade routes, not missionaries with a master plan, not armies forcing people to convert, just merchants, monks, and travelers walking thousands of miles across deserts and mountains, sharing ideas along with silk and spices. And every place Buddhism landed, it changed. It absorbed local beliefs, mixed with local culture, and became something new. That's why Buddhism in Japan looks nothing like Buddhism in Thailand. They barely seem like the same religion. So here's the thing that doesn't make sense at first. Buddhism was born in northern India around 500 BCE. The Buddha spent his whole life teaching in that region. For a few hundred years, Buddhism stayed pretty local. It was an Indian thing, but then something shifted. By the year 100 CE, Buddhism had spread to Central Asia. By 400 CE, it was huge in China. By 500 CE, it reached Korea. By 600 CE, it made it to Japan. By 700 CE, it was in Tibet, and later it spread throughout Southeast Asia. That's thousands of miles. Different languages, different cultures, different governments. No internet, no planes, no easy way to communicate across these distances. So how did this happen? And why did Buddhism succeed when so many other religions and philosophies stayed regional? The key was the Silk Road, but not the way most people think. When we hear Silk Road, we picture caravans carrying luxury goods, silk, spices, gold, jewels. And that's true. But the Silk Road wasn't just one road. It was a network of trade routes connecting India, Central Asia, China, the Middle East, and eventually all the way to Europe. And these routes didn't just carry products, they carried ideas. Merchants would travel these routes for months, sometimes years. They'd stop in towns along the way. They'd rest in Central Asian oasis cities, and in these stops, they'd meet monks who had set up monasteries. See, Buddhist monks figured something out early. They realized that traders needed places to stay. The journey across the deserts and mountains was brutal. So monks started building monasteries along the trade routes. These weren't just religious centers. They were rest stops, hotels, basically. Merchants would stay there, recover, get food and water, and hear the monks teaching. Some got interested, some converted, and then they'd continue on their journey and tell people in the next town what they learned. But here's where it gets interesting. Buddhism didn't spread as one unified thing. It splintered and adapted every place it went. Let me walk you through how this actually happened, because it's wild. But first, before I'm going to show you the interesting journey of Buddhism, show me some love by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Your help certainly goes a long way to get my videos suggested by the YouTube algorithms very much. First stop, Central Asia. This is the region that's now Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, parts of Pakistan. These were the oasis cities along the Silk Road. Places like Samarkand, Bamiyan, Kucha. Indian monks started showing up here around the 1st century, and they brought Buddhism with them. But Central Asia already had its own religions: Zoroastrianism, local shamanic practices, early Christianity in some areas. Buddhism didn't replace these, it mixed with them. The monks also had to translate Buddhist texts from Indian languages into local languages. And here's the thing about translation. It's not just swapping words. When you translate ideas, they change. Concepts that made sense in India had to be explained using Central Asian ideas. New words had to be invented. Meanings shifted. Then Chinese traders started coming through these Central Asian cities. They heard about Buddhism and brought it back to China. But now we're talking about a completely different culture. China already had Confucianism and Taoism. These were deeply rooted. Chinese people weren't just going to drop their traditions for some foreign religion. So Buddhism had to adapt or die. And it adapted. Big time. Chinese Buddhists started translating texts into Chinese. But they didn't just translate, they reinterpreted. They used Taoist concepts to explain Buddhist ideas. They made Buddhism fit into Chinese ways of thinking. The word for meditation in Chinese was borrowed from Taoist practice. The concept of emptiness was explained using Taoist philosophy. They also changed the focus. In India, Buddhism was about individual monks seeking enlightenment. In China, it became more about family, society, and ancestors. Chinese people cared deeply about honoring their ancestors. So Chinese Buddhism made room for that. You could honor your dead relatives and be a good Buddhist. Then there's the art. Indian Buddhist art showed the Buddha in a certain way, specific features, specific poses. When Buddhism got to China, Chinese artists started making Buddha statues that looked Chinese. The features changed, the robes changed, the artistic style changed. From China, Buddhism spread to Korea and then to Japan. But again, it didn't arrive as one thing. Different schools of Buddhism were competing. Different teachers brought different interpretations. And each country picked what resonated with them. Japan is a perfect example. When Buddhism arrived in Japan in the 6th century, Japan already had Shinto, their indigenous religion about nature, spirits, and ancestors. The Japanese didn't abandon Shinto. They blended it with Buddhism. They said the Shinto gods were actually Buddhist beings in disguise. Shrines and temples existed side by side. You could practice both. Japanese Buddhism also developed its own unique schools. Zen Buddhism, which is probably the most well-known Japanese form, is actually quite different from the Buddhism that started in India. It emphasizes direct experience and meditation over scripture study. It became very Japanese in its aesthetic, simple, minimal, focused on nature. Meanwhile, Buddhism was spreading south too. It went to Sri Lanka, then to Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. But the Buddhism that went south was different from the Buddhism that went north to China. Southern Buddhism, which we call Theravada, tried to stay closer to the original teachings. They kept the text in an ancient Indian language called Pali. They focused on the monastic life. They were more conservative about change. But even they adapted. In Thailand, Buddhism mixed with local beliefs about spirits and protective magic. In Myanmar, it mixed with Nat worship, local spirit religions. The core teachings might have stayed similar, but the practice on the ground looked different in every place. Then there's Tibet. Buddhism arrived in Tibet around the 7th century. But Tibet was geographically isolated, surrounded by the highest mountains in the world, so Tibetan Buddhism developed almost in its own bubble. It mixed with Bon, the indigenous Tibetan religion. It incorporated Tantra, esoteric practices involving visualization, mantras, and rituals. Tibetan Buddhism became this incredibly complex system with elaborate rituals, colorful art, and practices you don't see anywhere else. If you put Indian Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism side by side, you might not recognize them as related. And here's what's amazing. All of this happened through organic cultural exchange. No empire forced this. No army conquered these regions and imposed Buddhism. It spread because it was useful, because it answered questions people had, because it was flexible enough to adapt. The moment that really shows you how this worked is the story of the Chinese monk Xuanzang. In the year 629, Xuanzang decided he wanted to understand Buddhism better. But by this time, Buddhism in China had changed so much from the original that different schools were teaching contradictory things. Xuanzang wanted to go back to the source. He wanted to get the original text from India. So he set out on foot, alone. The Chinese government actually told him not to go. The journey was too dangerous. He snuck out anyway. It took him 17 years. He crossed deserts where travelers died of thirst. He crossed mountains where the paths were so narrow that one wrong step meant falling to your death. He was robbed. He nearly froze. He nearly starved. But he made it to India. He studied there for years. He collected hundreds of Buddhist texts, and then he made the journey back, carrying all these manuscripts. When he returned to China, he spent the rest of his life translating these texts into Chinese. And here's the thing, even though he went all the way to India to get the pure version of Buddhism, his translation still came out Chinese. He couldn't help it. His language shaped how he understood the texts. His culture shaped which parts seemed important. This story is Buddhism on the Silk Road in a nutshell. You had people who cared deeply about these teachings, who were willing to risk everything to spread them or understand them better. But every time the teachings moved, they changed. Not because people were careless, but because that's how culture works. Ideas don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in people's minds. And people are shaped by their language, their history, their values. Buddhism succeeded precisely because it was flexible. The Buddha himself supposedly said not to just believe what you're told, test it, see if it works for you. That attitude allowed Buddhism to adapt. If Buddhism had insisted on staying exactly as it was in India, it would have died out. Instead, it became dozens of different versions, each one fitting the needs of the people who practiced it. So here's what actually happened with Buddhism and the Silk Road. It wasn't a straight line from India to everywhere else. It was a slow, messy, organic process that took hundreds of years. Monks and merchants and travelers carried ideas along trade route. Every town they stopped in, every translation they made, every new culture they encountered, Buddhism changed a little more. Some places emphasized meditation, some emphasized ritual, some emphasized philosophy, some mixed Buddhism with local religions, some kept it more pure. Every version thought they were doing Buddhism correctly, and in a way, they all were. Because Buddhism had always been about adapting to the needs of the people practicing it. The Silk Road made this possible because it created these zones of contact. Places where Indian monks met, Central Asian traders met, Chinese scholars met Southeast Asian kings. These weren't invasions or forced conversions. These were conversations that lasted centuries. And the result is that today, Buddhism is one of the most diverse religions in the world. A Zen practitioner in Japan and a Theravada monk in Thailand and a Tibetan Lama are all Buddhists. But their day-to-day practice looks completely different. They're reading different texts, doing different rituals, sometimes even disagreeing on major points. But they all trace back to the same source, a guy in northern India 2,500 years ago who sat under a tree and figured some things out about suffering and how to end it. The Silk Road was the network that allowed those ideas to travel. But it was the willingness of Buddhism to change, to adapt, to become Chinese or Japanese or Tibetan, while still staying Buddhist. That's what made it survive. Most religions that tried to spread stayed rigid and either died out or stayed small. Buddhism bent, and because it bent, it spread to half of Asia and eventually to the whole world. Subscribe for more. Comment your thoughts. Share if this was interesting.